So drugs have some drugs have something called a black box warning. It's named a black box warning because on the pamphlet or those very big pharmaceutical pullouts that you get with your drug at the top is a warning that's sort of surrounded by a black box. That's where the name came from. They were first introduced in 1979. Um, and it's the FDA's strongest safety warning, indicating that a drug carries serious or life-threatening risks. The first one was put out for an antibiotic that was linked to a rare but fatal blood disorder. The latest numbers I could find that there are about 400 drugs right now with black box warnings covering a range of conditions and drugs from antibiotics to antidepressants. And they're drugs that you and I have all heard of. So the latest craze of the semaglutide, which is Ozempic and Wegovy, that has a black box warning for thyroid cancers.
Wow.
Singulair, which many people take for seasonal allergies, has a black box warning for mental health and suicide problems. Many of the SSRIs, which are given for anxiety and depression, have a black box warning for increased risks of suicide. Accutane, a very popular drug that parents give their teenagers for acne, has a black box warning. And then as we talked about the fluoroquinolines like Cipro and things like that, they've had 4 or 5 updates to their black box warning that include tendon rupture, neurological problems, things like that. The problem with black box warnings, the intention is good. So enough people reported that these particular drugs were causing side effects, and the FDA responds by saying, we're going to put a warning on this drug. And this warning is going to alert people, physicians and pharmacists, that sort of like a pause, take a pause. This is not to say the drug necessarily needs to be pulled from the market, because there may be some people who really do need some of these drugs, but it's meant to cause pause and let the doctor know. We should let the patient know the possible side effects. And that's where we get into problems. Many of the doctors have no idea that there are black box warnings on any of these drugs, because they don't necessarily, just like a doctor won't see the bottle of pills they're giving you because it's sent to the pharmacy and the pharmacist fills it. They don't see the big handouts that they open up. They don't know. There's no one communication system for physicians to know that a drug has a black box warning. So what we rely upon most in hospitals or doctors' offices is when you're putting it into the EMR, the electronic medical record, when a doctor's putting an order in, an alert will pop up and say, heads up, flashing light, this drug has a potential dangerous side effect. My experience and what I've heard from many physicians is we are sort of click fatigued, right? We click on so much in these medical records that they tend to just, oh, yeah, okay. Oh, yep, there's a warning. Okay, no problem. And they move on. So what's happening with black box warnings is the responsibility is sort of shifting all over the place, right? The doctors are thinking, well, if they even know about the drug, that there's a black box warning, we're assuming that the pharmacist is going to alert the patient. The pharmacist might be assuming, well, the doctor wouldn't prescribe it if they didn't think it was necessary, right? And the pharmacist doesn't have a time to call the doctor and say, hey, did you know there's a black box warning? Like, are you sure this is the drug you want to give? And the patient is just assuming no one's going to give them something that could be dangerous. So these black box warnings, despite the serious risks, patients often don't even know that they're taking a black box warning drug. They're buried in these long inserts, as we talked about. And, a 2015 study found that emergency and pediatric doctors correctly identified medications with black box warnings only 36% of the time. So they just really don't know. And only 13% of those doctors could recall the specific details of those warnings. So, it means that these high-risk drugs are being prescribed without doctors or patients fully understanding their dangers. Another interesting thing about black box warnings, they're a double-edged
You know,
sword for farm.
I've got to interrupt. Right? I mean,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
that's just so amazing that that something that can have those kinds of life-altering side effects can be treated so cavalierly within the medical community. It, you know, as a farmer, um, where we wouldn't it be cool if we could put a black box on a homemade chicken pot pie? So if a person wanted to come to my house and I make a chicken pot pie for them from my kitchen, I can put a black box on it and say, "Now this hasn't been government inspected. You know, it could kill you. Eat at your own risk." But the food community, the food industry, does not allow anything anywhere close to that. I mean, you can't. Uh, anyway, it doesn't allow anything close to that. And here we are in a medical community with this little, you know, this little kind of a well, you know, okay, we've done our due diligence. We've put the black box on. Now go ahead and play. And so that's where we are in the health. I'm just struck by the, I don't know, the protocol philosophical policy difference between the food and between the pharmaceutical
Sure.
in this respect. It's
Yeah, I
amazing.
think that's a really good point.
I've never heard it or thought of it or seen it. Brand new thought, everybody. Yeah.
Wow. So you'd not heard of black box warnings?
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, I'm aware of them, but the way you
Yeah.
describe it,
Yeah.
that it's essentially, um, I mean, we tried years ago to get Virginia to allow people to buy. I'll be stuck on a chicken pot pie, a chicken pot pie that doesn't come through an inspected, licensed, you know, government approved kitchen. Uh,
Right.
where everybody that bought one had to sign a waiver of understanding. This has not been government inspected, you know, blah blah blah. You're voluntary, consenting adult exercising freedom of choice, you know, da da da. And we couldn't even get a step in that. They just laughed us out of the General Assembly on that. And I would submit that your chances of being life threatened by a homemade chicken pot pie are far less than being life threatened by something that came out of a Merck lab.
Well, the problem with these black box drugs is, the intention in the beginning was great, but as
Yeah.
time has gone by, in my opinion, the research that I did, many of these black box drugs are just acting as a legal shield. They're not they're not serving their intended purpose to protect patients, right? Because what happens is when a drug gets a black box warning, it's a double-edged sword for a pharmaceutical company because when a drug has a black box warning, you can no longer advertise that drug direct to consumer on TV. And these pharmaceutical companies, as you know, if you've ever watched the evening news, get a lot of their funding and people interested in these drugs from direct to patient, direct to consumer advertising. So they're no longer allowed to advertise. But what happens on the flip side is their legal liability goes down, right? So with a black box warning in place, these drug companies can argue, well, we disclose the risks, right? So now it's not our responsibility anymore. So they're sort of shielded. These manufacturers are now shielded to a degree because they've done their due diligence of warning people. And then what happens is that burden falls to the physician, right? And the physician now needs to communicate this to people. And as we just discussed, they might not know about it. So that may not happen. And so what's interesting and what one person that I interviewed told me is that there are entire law firms now who are focused on getting black box warnings on drugs because then people can sue the physician for malpractice or not disclosing these particular side effects, if that makes sense. So people now can, if there's a black box warning and the physician didn't do their job, then, once this warning's in place, it sort of strengthens lawsuits against doctors who failed to disclose the risk. And we're getting right back to Sina's point here. The physicians are sort of set up for failure. How are they supposed to know that these exist? So yeah. And then there's one other piece of this. There, at least from a medical perspective, what some of the physicians have shared with me is sort of the pendulum swings the other way. So, sometimes these black box warnings make things worse. Like in 2004, the FDA added a black box warning to SSRIs, so antidepressants like Prozac and Zoloft, Lexapro, due to studies that they were increasing the risk of suicidal thoughts in young adults. Research is now coming out that what happened is suicide deaths and other psychotropic drugs actually went up after this happened because physicians were now afraid to prescribe these drugs. So they stopped prescribing the drugs. And these people, because we don't have a system that supports mental health in a way that, anything outside of drugs is very difficult to come by. And so, we sort of took the one tool away in this instance that doctors had in their short amount of time, like prescribing a pill is the quickest thing they can do. And so some research argue that these at least for SSRIs, that these warnings caused more harm than good and that the risks were overstated. So, in my opinion, sort of, and in other people's opinions who I've interviewed, this black box system is broken. Some of the high risk drugs don't get them. Others get them, and now we've created different problems. And I think the other interesting thing about this is that many of these warnings arrive really late. So there was a study done in 2024 that found that 80% of black box warnings come post-marketing studies, meaning that the risks weren't known until millions of people took these drugs.
Friends, want to dive deeper into our thought-provoking conversations? Become part of the Beyond Labels family today by joining below. For any gift amount, you'll get access to the full uncut episodes.
Every contribution, whether big or small, keeps this podcast going.
So join us and expand your Beyond Labels experience. Thank you.